turnout. In the middle of the summer, no less, on such a beautiful day, I'm sure you'd rather be outside in the rain or the humidity. But why would you want to do that when we have the opportunity to learn more about government resources for developing housing that's more affordable to low and moderate income people? So, my name is Jeff Lubell. I'm a member of the Norwich Planning Commission, and I am pleased to welcome our two speakers. Just a little framing here. So, the Norwich just passed the town plan. The town plan calls for the development of an affordable housing strategy for the town. It's one of the action items, and we are delivering on that action item. We have, as part of that process, we have held 5 listening sessions where we've been getting your input on what are you interested in, what would you like to see in the town of Norwich. And we're now at the phase where we are trying to sort of take some of that input and process it through learning about different opportunities. So this is one of a series of forums that we plan to hold. This first forum is focused on government funding opportunities, particularly those that are funded by the federal and state governments. There will be subsequent sessions on how do we encourage the development of housing by the private sector at more affordable price points. We plan to hold another session on accessory dwelling units and trying to figure out how do we overcome obstacles for that. We're looking at innovative septic solutions. We're looking at a number of different options, and hopefully through this process we'll all learn more about what our options are, and we can use that to inform the development of an affordable housing strategy. So there are several members of the Planning Commission here. Thank you. Several members of the Affordable Housing Task Force here. Former Planning Commission PC members, and just a lot of DRB. We got them all. Thank you. Anyway, thanks so much for coming. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. So the first, we will hear from Martin Hahn, who is the Housing Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Maybe, Martin, you could talk a little bit about the different state agencies and kind of how that...
Yes.
Because it's not always so clear to those of us.
It's not, particularly when we use acronyms.
Yes, Acronym City. This is VHCD. And then we'll hear from Andrew Winter, who is the Executive Director for Twin Pines Housing Trust. And many of you have heard Andrew before. We're looking forward to the tag team showing here. And without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to listen to the just to keep things going, because we're recording this for TV. We're going to let them do their presentation, and then we will have people come up and use the mic to ask questions so that everything's recorded. All right? Thank you.
Can I use the stand? So Andrew and I'm based in Montpelier, Andrew's in Hartford. We did this via email where we're going to sort of trade on, trade off about who's talking and taking turns. So we're kind of making it up as we go along. I've done this talking with community members for a large part of my career. I used to be a developer in Andrew's shoes. And I got to say, this is one of the best turnouts I've ever seen. And this here it is in the middle of summer. So clearly something that's near and dear to your hearts. And I hope that we can address whatever is on your mind tonight. And so I'm pleased to be here. Yes. And so I'm going to just start and tell you quickly about the organization that I work with, which is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. We've been in operation for 30 years and have supported the construction or renovation or building or preservation of 13,000 homes statewide. And those 13,000 homes cover a whole range of housing opportunities. Single-family home ownership, people who are buying their first home, multifamily rental for families, multifamily rental for individuals with special needs, multifamily rental for seniors, multifamily housing that includes all of those populations with services and transportation associated with it, mobile home parks, preserving them as an affordable housing opportunity, downtowns, rural, small, scattered site to larger single-family, larger multifamily development, developments. So there's a whole range buried in what we do. And we do that through delivery of a statewide network of nonprofit organizations. So Twin Pines Housing Trust in this region, to the north of you, Rural Edge, to the south, Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, to the west, Down Street Housing. So there's a nonprofit organization that covers, that serves different parts of the state. So we are, by statute, our funds go through a nonprofit organization that then may form a limited partnership, and we may or may not want to get into that. So, and our partnership with those nonprofits is to deliver state of Vermont funds and federal funds, and we'll get more into what those different pots of funds are. And we support those organizations with operating funds and with technical assistance. So one thing that's unique about Vermont, and it's in our statute, is that our funds are to be invested in a way that protects affordability in perpetuity. So this isn't 5 years affordability, 15 years affordability, 30 years, it's forever. And that's a pretty long time, and so we're invested in supporting the network that delivers. Conservation Board, which again is something that's very unique, formed 30 years ago. The notion is that housing and conservation are at odds with each other. You're going to build a house, you're going to build it on farmland because that's the cheapest land. Well, you've now infringed on conservation ethic. So we in Vermont work collaboratively, and in part, I'll say quite bluntly, there's a political benefit to that. When we go to the State House for our annual appropriation, we have housing advocates, we have owners, people who are living in that housing, and we have farmers, and we have towns who are interested in town forests, all talking with a single voice, and we work collectively, collaboratively on that. So my colleague, who's the conservation director, told me about some projects that they have done in Norwich, and I apologize because I don't know them, but she mentioned the Sweetland Farm on Union Village Road. There's a conservation easement with Vermont Land Trust. In the same area, I love the name of this, the Hogwash Farm. And then the Hazen Trail near the Montshire Museum, we've invested in conserving that. And then a project that goes way back, way before, I think, Andrew and my time, the Farrell Farm, which is both conserved land and affordable housing. And so that's a project where we've done dual work. So that's who we are, the Housing and Conservation Board, and we'll get into it in a good bit more detail moving forward.
Thank you. So, advance one. I've had the opportunity to appear before you a couple of times in the community, and I'm delighted to be back here to talk about Twin Pines and what we're up to, and also try to put that in context of the larger conversations around affordable housing that go on at the state level. So briefly, Twin Pines Housing was founded in 1990. There were several organizations on each side of the river that joined together to create affordable housing. And we have grown quite a bit. Today we have 417 multifamily units, and that kind of stretches the scope of what Martin was talking about. We have everything from housing for seniors to transitional housing, people coming out of homelessness, to family housing or general occupancy housing, and sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. So you'll have to watch for that as we talk about it. But the idea is that, family housing or general occupancy housing would be available, maybe not just to families, but to seniors who are also in need of housing. And we also do home ownership. So for many of you here in town, Martin made reference to Farrell Farm. Star Lake was the affordable housing portion of that co-development effort that was done back in the early 1990s. There are 14 single-family homes, a mixture of styles, but all roughly 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath homes adjacent to the Farrell Farm. And those are protected through restrictions that keep them affordable on resale. And we limit the amount of equity that homeowners take out of it in an effort to kind of keep them affordable and long-term. Most of our units are actually in New Hampshire. Right now, about 40% of our units are here in Vermont, 60% in New Hampshire, and that's just a function of where we've acquired some properties recently. In addition to managing housing, we're in the business of developing new affordable housing. And right now, we're actively developing additional units in Hartford, West Lebanon, Lebanon, and Hanover. And we'll show some pictures on those, but basically we have about another 120 units in various stages of development, including 59 units that are currently under construction in West Lebanon and in Hartford and White River Junction. So I'll show some pictures of those as we proceed. If you slide through, this is just a graphic to kind of give you a sense of where our portfolio is. And as you'll see, most of the units are in sort of the core towns of the Upper Valley. Star Lake, you see up to the north along 91. We have a 9-unit mobile home park in South Royalton. We have a 28-unit project called Safford Commons in Woodstock that took many, many years to come to fruition due to litigation. I see some nodding heads there. I think people know how long that one took. And then to the east in Enfield, we have a place called Ann's Place, 10 units there. But most of our housing is in the core, in Lebanon, Hanover. Our biggest projects are Guile Hill, which is a 120-unit development right on the access road to the hospital. That project includes 76 rental units that Twin Pines owns through an affiliate. And it also includes 7 home ownership units that are kept affordable, much like Star Lake, and then an additional 37 market rate for sale units. And then our other big project is in West Lebanon, where we have 100 units of housing that is subsidized. And we'll talk about some of those definitions to just make sure that we've got some common language as we kind of go through this.
So a year ago, the Vermont State Legislature passed a housing revenue bond, which is a first for Vermont, and was signed by the governor, was actually proposed by the governor, coming out of his commitment to trying to attract and retain people who are coming to Vermont. And the notion is that the housing revenue bond is to support, and I'm going to use the buzz term, net new units. That is, let's create new homes for people to increase the supply so that people who want to be able to stay here are able to stay here, or people who are looking to relocate to Vermont have a place to relocate to. So the housing revenue bond is $37 million, which is on top of, we get every year somewhere about 40% of the property transfer tax. So when a property is sold, the seller or the buyer pays the tax? The buyer sells the tax. It pays the tax, goes to the state of Vermont. Some of it comes to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board for housing and conservation. Some of it goes to the Agency of Natural Resources, and the rest goes to the general fund. So that's funds that we get about $4 to $5 million every year for housing. But in addition, we now have the housing revenue bond. And the big difference is on the housing revenue bond, so it's net new units, but also we're able to invest a larger amount than we would otherwise. So these are projects that we funded to date. You can see we've made commitments of about $17 million out of a $37 million bond. We hope to be fully committed, say, by January of 2020. And just to give you a sense of what we're looking at with this, I love spreadsheets and tables, so we're going to look at pictures as well. But so what we see here is Allard Square. I won't go through them all, but that's a senior housing that's developed by Cathedral Square Corporation. There's 2 projects on here, the Wilson Block and the Putnam Block. Wilson Block's in Springfield, Putnam's in Bennington. Downtown, significant historic buildings that are vacant and have been vacant for decades. So we're bringing them on as net new units. It can be very expensive because they're historic buildings on the historic register, and those windows are very expensive. A lot of this is family housing, Putney Landing, Laurentide. The Twin Pines Wentworth project are for families. One of the things that we're discovering is that families are shrinking, and so when we used to do a mix of 4, 3, and 2 bedrooms, everything we do now pretty much is 1 and 2 bedrooms. We're even doing micro apartments where it's designed for a single person who's in transition and is living an uncluttered life. So a micro apartment can be 375 square feet. So we still are doing some 3-bedroom units where the market study says that there's a need for that, but generally we're seeing that the demand is going down. And then there are a couple of homeownership projects on here. The East Branch Farms, Ethan Allen Condominiums, Cambrian Way, HO is homeownership, are all to make, essentially it goes in as down payment assistance. The home costs $200,000 to build. We provide, we provide a grant to the nonprofit who provides a grant to the home buyer of $50,000, so their net purchase price is $150,000. So that's how the home ownership piece of this works.
Great. And I'm just going to, as we move from this slide to the next one, I just want to quickly point out, so you saw it by Twin Pines name, Housing Vermont, HVT. So often when we are developing affordable housing in the state, there are local organizations, as Martin indicated, that serve each region of the state. But in addition to that, adding additional capacity is a group called, a nonprofit called Housing Vermont. They're out of Burlington, and they often work with us, particularly when we're doing new construction projects, and that provides additional capacity to an organization like Twin Pines. Because we work on both sides of the river, we're a little bit different than many other organizations, so the fact that we're doing a couple of new construction projects right now is something that's unique, and we're kind of able to do that in part because we work with Housing Vermont, and they provide competence, experience in developing affordable housing around the state. They have financial resources that we don't necessarily have, and because of that, it allows us to actually focus our efforts in the Upper Valley on the New Hampshire side solely, where we're working. There isn't somebody like Housing Vermont, so they're an important part of the housing landscape, and you might hear about them more as we go through the conversation. So, just a quick slide here to kind of put out a couple of numbers there. One is our unemployment rate. I don't think anybody who's looking for a job probably has one, and anybody who's looking to hire somebody probably knows how hard it is to hire somebody right now. The rate, I think this is a couple months ago, 1.9% in our micro NECTA, which sort of picks up this region on both sides of the river, and that is effectively 0%. Let's be honest. There are lots of people who are out looking for employees, and that is something that we're hearing all the time from employers about the need to bring workforce to the community, to the Upper Valley, and the difficulty that sometimes they're having in finding adequate housing. And I'll point out the second number, and that's the vacancy rate. This number is from our region in 2017, 2.9%. Most of the time we talk about a healthy vacancy rate being about 5%. You want opportunities as a renter to go out and find a product that you like, or an apartment that you like. We want landlords to have an incentive to fix up their apartments, and if it's really easy, maybe they decide they're not going to fix up that apartment. And so the housing stock can suffer a little bit. And so having a balanced marketplace where there are buyers, there are sellers and buyers, and there's a vacancy rate closer to 5% is generally what we're looking for. And that's the kind of environment that we're trying to help create by creating additional affordable housing. If you're looking for affordable housing right now, and particularly if you are looking for subsidized affordable housing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that term and what that means, but generally it's housing that people are paying 30% of their income towards, and then government through a variety of different programs, sometimes referred to in shorthand as Section 8, picks up the difference, but there are a variety of different programs. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a program. HUD has several different programs that provide subsidy. And those projects, which are generally places that folks on the very lowest income band that we serve are trying to get into, those wait lists can be quite long. We've talked a little bit about the deficit in the Upper Valley. This figure comes from the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Commission doing a study several years ago. They're doing a new housing needs assessment. I think it'll probably be out in 2019 at this point. That will, working with Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, will try to capture the data on both sides of the river to give us a better sense of how many units we really need. But this number was sort of looking out on the New Hampshire side, trying to figure out how many units need to be created in 28 different communities over 10 years. So it's a big number. It's not one community, and I think that's really important, but it's trying to think about this on a more regional basis.
I said I'd like spreadsheets, and so we're not going to get deeply into this. This is a development budget that shows what it costs for one project to do. And I used to be a developer, and I was remembering on my drive here, my wife told this joke, which I wasn't sure it was funny at the time, but why do people hate developers instantly? Because it saves time. But that said, I love development, and so this just looks at, and this is going to, every project is going to be a little bit different. So this one is in Montpelier. The acquisition cost is only $40,000 because the town had bought a parcel down in the downtown core, probably 15 years ago, did abatement of contaminated soils. They're bringing in the bike trail. They've reinforced the bank along the river and have done a lot of investment in infrastructure. And because they wanted affordable housing, they sold it, were able to sell it essentially for nothing. Here it says $40,000, which are probably just transaction costs. But so we have acquisition, we have construction hard costs. What does it cost to build? Then all the soft costs, which get on top of it, the architectural, the legal, construction period interest, construction loan fees, developers fees. So part of how Andrew and the nonprofits and Housing Vermont pay themselves is they earn a fee when they do development, which covers some portion of their cost of doing development. And then there are reserves. And so you can see here, in this case, the per unit total development, the per unit cost for each unit was $232,000, which is extremely low, actually. We generally see ranges closer to $280,000 to $320,000 per unit, per apartment, to build it and have it be finished. And what we'll talk about in a slide shortly is how do you pay for that?
Okay. So if we could advance the slide one, I will. So one of the issues here is, when we talk about affordable housing, who are we really talking about? So I'm going to step back a little bit so everybody can sort of see this chart. You're welcome. But generally, most of the programs that we're going to be talking about are sort of focused on folks at or below 80% of the area median. What's exciting about the housing revenue bond is it also includes the opportunity to do some higher income units, those serving higher income households, including folks who are at 80% all the way up to 120%. So if we were to quickly do our math here, family of four making as much as $88,000 would qualify for some of the housing that's being created through the housing revenue bond. So that's a little bit different. It's an exciting opportunity, and particularly in the Upper Valley, there are a whole lot of people who are making between 60 and 80 and 100% of the area median, which if they have student debt, if they have credit card debt, if they have other things going on in their lives, and faced with high housing costs, 2 bedrooms that can cost as much as $2,400, $2,500 a month at the highest end, having access to affordable housing that they can afford is critically important. So it's exciting, and it's exciting that we're able to do that through the housing revenue bond. Most of the programs that are generally available are sort of focused at 80%, 60%, the bulk at 60 and 50%, and that just kind of gives you a sense. Sometimes we use the term low-income families, and that's anybody at or below 80%. Very low is 50%, and extremely low income is 30%. Again, this is based on 30%, $25,100 for a family of four. So smaller families, lower income limits on who we're trying to serve. Hard to do the extremely low income projects, and create those kind of units without some additional subsidy. So we're actually doing a project. If you noticed my boots on today, I was painting. Yes, the executive director gets to paint. sometimes. We were painting last night and tonight 18 units for the chronically homeless in Lebanon, a project that is on Parker Street, right by the CCBA. So that project utilizes some funding from the National Housing Trust Fund, and it's really focused at trying to serve those very lowest income folks. But that's rare. Most of the programs these days are really sort of focused at the 60% band.
So we have an apartment, let's say it's $300,000 to build it. How does that then get translated into affordable housing? Well, we think about the three legs of the stool, and I like a little graphic that you want. You need the three legs in order to have it operate stably. The three legs are the capital. What does it cost to build it? The operating subsidy, what is it, how much money do you need to bring in to support the ongoing operations? And then services, how do you help ensure that the people who are living there are having success in their home? So I've listed the capital sources. So that we've talked about the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. The next three are federal money. So home program is money that comes to VHCB. It's about $3 million a year that we award competitively to developers that lower the cost. It comes in as a grant. It lowers the cost of development and how much somebody has to carry in debt. The Housing Trust Fund is targeted for people who are extremely low income, the 30% or below. The Vermont Community Development Program operates the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program. Is there any open grants in Norwich? No. Has there been any CD funds?
Any DR money. CDBG, DR.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
would have been
DR
DR
standing for
And disaster relief.
disaster relief.
and maybe DR too, but it's that far back.
Yep. So community development block grant funds. The most significant source of federal funds that come into affordable housing is a low-income housing tax credit. And that comes in, you get an investor who works alongside Twin Pines and Housing Vermont. They provide equity up front. In return, they get a tax break over 10 years. And those are generally larger institutions, financial institutions, banks. And you could be a local bank, or it could be a regional, or it could be a national bank, or an international bank. And that creates a real opportunity because they bring equity. It's cash up front to lower the cost. It also adds complexity. You're bringing in another partner whose return is based on a very complex calculation about how they're making money off this deal. And so it helps transactions happen, but it also it adds complexity. So another leg of the stool is the operating subsidy. It's otherwise known as Section 8, although there are various kinds of operating subsidies. So project-based is that there is an apartment that, regardless of who's living there, if they're income qualified, there's Section 8 money that's coming into that apartment. It's based on the project. And then there are tenant-based vouchers, which goes with the tenant. Wherever they go, that voucher goes with them. So they could move into a Twin Pines apartment, the voucher is used, then they move out and move into a private apartment, the voucher is used there. So there's different project-based and tenant-based. And then I put sinking fund, and I think there was a sinking fund on the development pro forma we looked at. You save money today to pay for a future operating loss. That is, you know that we're going to have to replace that roof in 10 years. You create your own internal subsidy so that when the roof has to be replaced in 10 years, you have that operating cash. And then lastly, services. So services are associated, all private landlords provide services. Everybody provides services. Twin Pines has a service coordinator. And in some family housing, that may be it. It's somebody who collects the rent, checks to see if everybody's okay, make sure that the lawn is cut. The services also could be more intensive based on the needs of the residents who are living there. Mental health agency, healthcare providers, we're seeing hospitals step in much more aggressively to support people who are coming out of the medical center and transitioning into affordable housing, and what supports do they need there. And actually I skipped the first one, which is SASH, Support and Services at Home, which is a service, coordinated services for seniors that works with Twin Pines, with the hospital, with all the service providers.
So that's the three-legged stool.
And I'll just pick up actually just a brief word about the SASH program. So we have a panel, as they are called, approximately 80 to 90 seniors with whom we work to help keep them safe and housed at home. And it may be things like making sure folks are getting to the hospital. It may be running health classes and wellness classes. And we, as part of that service, we also have the services of a nurse that we contract through APD or Alice Peck Day Hospital to make sure that we're catching issues before they occur that might jeopardize the long-term health and safety of residents, tripping, falling hazards, those types of things, but wellness classes in addition. So that's something that we provide not just for units in our portfolio that we own and manage, but elsewhere in the community. So our biggest senior project is 34 units. It's called Greystone in White River Junction. But we also provide SASH services here in Norwich at Norwich Senior Housing. So again, that's sort of gives you a sense of the additional things that the nonprofit community does above and beyond creating traditional housing. So these are a couple of current projects. I've mentioned a couple of them already. Sykes Mountain Avenue, that's 30 units. It was exciting. I was out there today. We're dropping, we've got all our concrete in the ground. We're putting steel in place. We've got a big crane up there. It is an awesome thing to see. That'll be 30 units. And as Martin said, we're tending to do more one-bedrooms and two-bedroom units now as opposed to 3- and 4-bedroom units. And that's because of family size. So this project will have 15 one-bedrooms and 15 two-bedroom units. And will include 9 units serving that 80 to 120% of the area median income band that I mentioned. Again, even at that price, we'll be pricing those units below market because, again, you can find 2 bedrooms that are $1,500 and $1,700 and as much as $2,500. To the side, so Sykes Mountain Avenue is under construction and will be done hopefully this time next summer. Also under construction right now, in fact, we're celebrating a groundbreaking on it tomorrow, is our Tracy Street project. And that's 29 units, 19 one-bedrooms, 10 two-bedrooms. Again, a little heavier on the one-bedrooms because that's where we're seeing most of the demand right now. And that project is serving folks at or below 60%. There are a couple of units that will be serving folks with mental illness through a rental assistance contract, but the vast majority of folks are going to have no subsidy, which means they've got to have a job. And typically, who is that? It might be a single mom who's working a job, getting paid $12, $15 an hour, $20 an hour. It's folks who are generally hourly employees who are in need of housing. That site, it's a wonderful site. For those of you who know where the Kilton Library is in West Lebanon, it's immediately across the street from it. Close to advanced transit, there are 3 bus hubs that tie in there. And so it's a great location. We're really excited about that. And it will be the first net zero building, multifamily building in market rate or affordable in the state of New Hampshire. So we're really excited about that. I mentioned the Parkhurst project, 18 units for the chronically homeless, extremely low-income households. We're working with the Upper Valley Haven. They're providing enhanced case management services to help those folks. And Martin made reference to hospitals stepping up. This is one of those projects where Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center is actually providing some ongoing financial support for that enhanced case management services. And then lastly, Summer Park is a project that we're working on with the town of Hanover. 24 units of senior housing that was developed in the 1970s. The town is looking for us to redevelop it. We're hoping to create 42 units of housing over the next couple of years. So we're busy putting together all of the necessary financing for that. So just kind of examples of the kinds of projects that we're doing. All of them are, larger. I mean, the particularly Sykes and Tracy Street are larger. Those and even Summer Park, when that's done, there are currently 3 8-unit buildings. We'll be adding, none of which have an elevator. Kind of hard to imagine, second-story residents who may have mobility issues in that setting, and that's part of the reason we're creating or redeveloping that site to add an elevator building to the site. And so that building will be fairly large in the sense that it will be 42 units with a mix of studio and one-bedroom units. But if you'll advance the slides, please, I will show you. There are lots of other examples of smaller scale housing in our region. And so these are a couple if you just kind of want to go through these.
I own the typo.
You own the typo?
I own the
Okay.
typo. Yep. Dorset Community Housing.
Yes. And Great River Terrace and Brattleboro, but again, these are all just examples of some small projects. Are there words that you want, any additional words you want to say about these?
So this.
Here, I'll give you this mic.
Yep, so this project is in Brattleboro, exit 3, there's the Rotary. If you go north a quarter of a mile, the Lamplighter Hotel used to be there on the left. They purchased and are redeveloping the Lamplighter Hotel for a combination of housing for those who are homeless in collaboration with Brattleboro Retreat, as well as general occupancy housing. So it's an interesting challenge we're seeing around Vermont are motels that are now, are dinosaurs that are on the edge of towns and are underutilized or being, and owners are walking away from creating some blight. So this is a situation where Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust was able to step in and do something pretty innovative.
Yeah, I mean, this is an example of a project very similar to what we're doing at Parkhurst. Extremely low income, chronically homeless, working with a local, in collaboration with a local shelter or human service provider to support the residents who are there. And so that's something that we're working on. Yeah, question?
How many units is this?
This one is 22. Yes, great question, thank you. You want to talk about it? Okay, just another, so this is up in the Northeast Kingdom, an example of a newer construction project
Yes.
supported by the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. This is in Waitsfield on Route 100. Again, just another senior housing, just trying to give examples of what affordable housing can look like. Because again, I think people sometimes have this misconception that everything is big. And the reality is that, in all places, we try to find and create housing that is contextually appropriate. So, senior housing there. So that's the end of our slideshow. And I think we're going to keep going right into questions, or do you want to moderate here?
Yeah, so I think we should go right into questions. So if you have questions, if you could come up, would you mind?
And we can do
Because we're sharing a mic here.
And you want us, you can sit over there. Do you want us to sit at the table, or what do you want to do?
Why don't you guys just bring your chairs over here.
Okay.
Just say who you are.
Okay, my name is Kurt Kelsey. We're over on Norwood Lake Road. And in seeing all of these and driving some in person, with the exception of this, and this is on Route 100, you said, okay. I have a couple of questions, actually. And this is not meant as a criticism, but there seems to be kind of a gap. Okay. You have a number of multi-unit, brand spanking new, looks like they're brand spanking new. And there must be part of the population, I think it's an incredibly growing population, of people who have lived in Vermont for a very long time. They find themselves now trying to subsist on Social Security or some award from workers' comp for a permanent injury. And they have lived in, and maybe even raised families in homes on 10, 20, and 100 acres. It's not like we're in Detroit or Chicago where you say, okay, we're going to put a house on this 40-foot lot, and this 40-foot lot, and this 40-foot lot, which is very nice if you're co-housing and then you're maintaining a very nice, large, we feel like we're still in Vermont area. So, given that kind of a population, and while the organizations, Twin Pines and the others, across the state are doing I presume it looks like a very good job of handling big things. One, how does someone in the population that I'm describing just to say, I just want little 500 square foot, energy efficient Vermont, or container home or tiny house, whatever, and you've got, I'm picturing something like you've got, particularly with your sophistication or some amount of sophistication, you have another population that says, hey, I've got 40 acres and I want to age in place. And if I took 2 Vermont homes and I then shared what the entire thing costs, amongst the 3 of us, didn't involve, to a large extent, no disrespect, any great development, aspects, didn't require any particular services, elevators, organizations checking to see who's okay. You were checking on each other, make sure you're okay. If that's the scenario, is there a way to financially bridge the gap between moving at 65 with your grandkids in Tahiti, not onto Route 100, but as nice as that's been renovated, but into something that looks something like what you've actually had all of your life in Vermont? And are there ways that small developers, folks operating under the radar, can tap into this same very large concept where you've got 1 or 2 potential buyers, very small, simply constructed, and a list of people that would be interested in having that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. I will say, for those who don't know what Vermont is, so that Vermont is a modular home that is produced right here in Hartford, in no small part thanks to the support of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which did significant work in working with Steve Davis, the developer of Vermont, to make sure that these homes, these factory-produced homes, would be energy efficient, and working with Efficiency Vermont to try to make them as efficient as they can be. And I'm pleased that we, Twin Pines, took the very first home off the production line. It's in a mobile home park in South Royalton. So I appreciate the question, because I know that for many folks, a home like this, which is a wonderful replacement for a mobile home. It's you can get it in a variety of sizes, 600 square feet, 1 bedroom, 1 bath at 600 square feet. You can get a 2-bedroom, for 800, approximately 800 square feet. And for some folks, that is a great option, and it's one that we've supported through our home ownership program, because we recognize that not everybody in Vermont or New Hampshire is going to end up in a big multifamily building. It's one thing if it's in downtown and people want to be able to walk and they want to be able to get in public transportation. All of those things are wonderful, but it's not for everyone, and we definitely recognize that, and have worked really hard with VHCB through its Homeland program, which supports home ownership, to make sure that there are seniors who've been able to replace homes and retire in dignity with a place that is energy efficient, with frankly $15 a month in energy costs, just so they're hooked into the electricity. It's a great model, so thank you for bringing that up. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say.
Yeah, well, I'll just a couple things. So to add about you mentioned the homeland program. So it's a homeownership program that's buyer driven. So somebody qualifies for a grant, $40,000 is generally the range. They go through a home buyer education program, then they go find the home they want to live in. Twin Pines is not building the home. They're going into the community, they're working with a realtor, so we're trying to support people who are making those kinds of choices. But you point out a weakness in the delivery system, which I don't see a solution to, which is smaller scattered site developments. So you have an existing organization who's a developer, and remember the perpetual affordability. We are committing to stewarding these forever. So to do not only 1 unit here or 4 units here, it's very hard to do. It's very hard to manage. And so the development community is focused on downtowns. I mean, we're committed to smart growth. So I live in Barry, but I'm going to use an example in Montpelier, which is the French block, which is above Aubuchon's, has been vacant for 70 years, an historic building. And it's a narrow population who wants to live in that. I agree with you 100%. But it's a community development project, it's a housing project, it's a community investment project. And that's then partnered with their Taylor Street project, which is downtown, on the rec path, new construction, family housing. And again, it's not serving the population that you described, which is what I've got. I've got a home on 2 acres. And if I needed to, I could do an accessory unit for a family member to move in. Because the system hasn't designed, I don't think, a good solution for that problem.
But is there a way that the system can be tweaked so if you have a Steve Davis, okay?
Yep.
Or a small developer can enter the system and say, I have 2 purchasers and this, or
No.
is that, okay, you have to develop a different way?
Yeah, so we, by statute, our funds go into a nonprofit organization who's committed to the perpetual affordability. And it's a part of the system. And the home program that I meant is a 30-year affordability restriction. The Housing Trust Fund is a 30-year, the low-income housing tax. So unfortunately,
You have to
Yeah,
reinvent the wheel.
the wheel is,
Wheel.
yes.
So let me,
But
I'm gonna just modify that slightly in that we have worked with Steve I mentioned we had a senior, she was in a mold-infested home that was incredibly energy efficient. She was, on limited income, and we worked with her. We worked with Cover. We worked home repair. They did a bunch of work on fixing up the foundation. We demolished the existing house. Cover did the foundation work, and Steve Davis provided the unit, utilizing funding from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So we can do those one-off projects, working with Steve and working with Cover and other organizations to make it happen. It's labor intensive. It is a piece. It is of the solution. It is, but I think that's the model. And so that was a perfect example of how we can collaborate to get things done.
And it's one of the purpose of a forum like this, is you're telling us what you see as a need that's perhaps not met. So I'm happy to hear it. We're here to design solutions that work for you and your community. So if there's a development solution that isn't being responded to, let's know it. And let's talk to your lawmakers as well as us.
Thank you. Roger? We're gonna, try to get through as many questions.
Yep.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I thought it was really interesting to see just also the definitions based on incomes and sort of how you're developing. I guess my question is, you said affordable / below market about halfway through the presentation. And so can you tell me how you make the evaluation of your homes being below market rental?
Sure.
And then can you talk sort of about what the market really is, and then how you look to other partners to regulate that market, whether it be legislators or developers or as a real estate entity? Because as you said, it's very unregulated normally, and it can range from one bedrooms can range from 1,500 to 2,500, I believe you said.
So just to clarify, yeah, I was talking about 2 bedrooms, definitely, 1,500 to 2,500. So I will talk a little bit about the first part, and then I'm going to turn it over to the second part of that question. Hopefully you were paying attention, and try to address it. So when we do development projects, when we're doing, whether it's the project Wentworth on Sykes Mountain Avenue in White River or the project on Tracy Street, we do something called a market study. And we actually have commissioned someone to go out and look at the price in the rental market, where we're drawing residents from, how much people are paying, and those market studies, which typically are sort of 50 to 100 pages in length, help educate us as to what we might expect in the marketplace. And that's data that we then use in justifying to the funders, hey, this is what we think we can get. Our goal is always to try to use as much debt on a project as we can. Well, why do you do that? This is, you're trying to make affordable housing. Well, we know that the resources that the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board have are limited, just as all these other federal programs are limited. So when we size a project and we're looking at it, we start with how much debt can it support? And often, if you're trying to keep the rents affordable, it's not that much. Maybe it's $20,000 a unit, maybe it's $30,000, $50,000. That's probably about how much debt per rental unit you're going to put on. And then we turn to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, we turn to Vermont Housing Finance Agency, which doles out the low-income housing tax credits that Martin mentioned, and we use that to provide all the additional financing. I often use the analogy, if somebody's buying a home, they're probably putting, maybe they put down 5%, 3%, but more likely than not in this marketplace, you're probably putting down 20% and borrowing 80%. With affordable housing, we're almost doing the exact opposite. We're literally putting on $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per unit of debt, and essentially using the equity generated through the low-income housing tax credits and soft debt provided by the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to finance the rest. So it's a little bit of a puzzle, but it's always driven from what's the market, who are we trying to address, and all these programs have income restrictions. So we're always going to be looking at what is the most restrictive source that is going into this unit, and that's going to drive how much we charge for that unit. It's based on family size, it's based on income. The idea is that everybody needs affordable housing, whatever your income. You need housing that you can afford, and so that's that kind of gives you a quick overview.
Andrew, can you just say what are some of the rents on some tax credit level?
Sure. So typical, you might be looking at $750 for a 1-bedroom. You might be looking at $850 for a 2-bedroom. That's sort of the area. You might be a little bit higher depending on the county, but that's going to be somewhere in the $750 to $850 range for a 1-bedroom, $850 to $950 for a 2. So well below market. Well below market.
Rephrase for me, Andrew, since he was looking at you when he asked the question, not a quick question I'm answering.
Are there things at the legislative policy level that we can do to regulate markets, to think about markets, and be thinking about affordable housing? Roger, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a developer, not a policy person, sort of by nature, but the way that Vermont is delivering this is through this system of having the nonprofits partnering with the for-profit investors, the for-profit construction companies, the architects, to identify opportunities. So the policy is in here. That is, we don't tell Twin Pines, and by we I'm thinking of the board of directors of the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, who's a part appointed by the governor and lawmakers, we don't tell you what you should do. You tell us what you think works, and then we see if we can't fit it into the puzzle. So if there's something, again, that you think you should be able to do with your public resources that you're not able to do. It's really important to let us know, and it's important to let lawmakers know. But it's here, you're going to determine the innovation that's going to work in Norwich. And maybe it's a plain Jane, 12-unit, 1 and 2 bedroom tax credit project that's set nicely on an in-town lot. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe it's something else that you think works, and then it's up. So you're the policymakers. We respond to you more than anything else. Is that a?
So, I don't have an
No,
issue, you hear me?
No, I think it's just pick up on the mic, on the video.
So, I'm from the town of Thetford. We've been through this for almost 13 years now. So the deficiency in the program, and I guess my question to Andrew is, okay, so Norwich wanted to develop 12 units for low-income tax credits.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if Andrew could say, yes, we can do that.
No, you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, he should have said it's
so-
22.
Yes.
Thanks for being here. One of the things that we've just completed, thanks to support from BHCB, we've got a draft housing needs assessment looking at Thetford and Fairleigh, because there are two communities that are interested in doing something. So, 12 units by itself, there are a lot of transaction costs. I mean, Martin, you saw that budget. There are a lot of line items in there. So one of the things that we've looked at is the possibility of actually doing what I would call a scattered site project, where we do 10, 12 units in Fairleigh, 10, 12 units in Thetford, and potentially 10 or 12 units in Norwich. I mean, there is a way to pair that together and do it across town lines. There's nothing that in the programs, in the funding that would restrict us from doing that. And we've done that in other communities. So like in Enfield, that Ann's Place project that I mentioned in Enfield, 10 units there, that was done in conjunction with 2 properties in Lebanon. And we put it all together to have a project that was financeable.
It's a statewide problem, is how to provide affordable housing in small communities that are isolated from.
And especially when most communities in Vermont are small communities.
Yes,
Thank you for that
absolutely.
feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Ernie Chicatelli. I'm going to make just sort of a statement first before I sort of get into the kind of questions that some things I want to understand that you brought up. But it seems to me that there's like a fundamental flaw in the way we're approaching the housing problem and related problems. The lack of affordability of housing is not the problem, it's the symptom of the problem. The problem is economic inequality. And until that's resolved, we're always going to have a housing problem. It's treating the housing problem is treating the symptom, and like any good doctor, you treat the symptom as well as until you get the cure done. And so I'm not criticizing that the affordable housing has to be taken care of. But if there's no one, and from what I see, there is no one addressing at any level. We do have at least one policymaker in here. So I'm sort of addressing that statement to him too. Is there anyone else I've missed? No. Until we have that addressed, really this is almost a feudal sort of sweeping the tide kind of issue. And I mean, part of the problem is that, for instance, we have developers being the people who are trying to resolve the problem. To me, development is part of the problem because it's generally a laissez-faire sort of thing. There's very little regulation, relatively speaking. If we wanted to actually control housing prices, there would be regulations that control housing prices. For instance, in Norwich, there might be some kind of regulation that says, no, you can't build any more $750,000 houses in this town. They have raised the value of the town and made it unaffordable, which, by the way, is what part of the problem is. And that's some of what I've dug up in the course of all of this. But the other part of the problem is that affordable housing basically is a subsidy shifting the burden from the private people that benefit from the shortage of housing, doing development and so on, and shifts it over to both the taxpayers, the rest of the public. And that's not fair. And that has to be resolved as well. That's why subsidy, affordable housing that relies on subsidies, not a great idea. What really should be happening is people should simply be paying what they've earned. And it doesn't matter, that goes right to the bottom of the economic food chain. Everyone should be earning enough to afford housing, food, clothing. End of story, and every single person who's involved in any kind of thing, including affordable housing, should be agitating for fixing that problem and demanding equality. And of course, I don't have to really go on too much about how inequality is a problem in and of itself. Everyone, it's in the news, we have a president based on who's there because of it, the whole 9 yards. Well, they said that they do want observations and stuff too. So, you're doing what, I have a right here, so stop.
You could ask your question, please.
I do have some questions, actually.
Great.
What or maybe I need some understanding, some education here. Because one of the things that you brought up was the median and median housing values and median incomes are sort of the root of what you're dealing with. Those are the basic numbers you're dealing with. And I'm going to say that I use this thing called data, city hyphen data, and look up Windsor County, Norwich, and a Massachusetts town I'm familiar with that has a similar problem that I have. I'm doing some work in. And it turned out that basically they said the 80% is what they call the median income. But it turns out that, like, if you're using that 0.3 of somebody's monthly income, you basically can meet, other than Norwich housing prices, you can meet a monthly payment, a reasonable monthly payment. So I'm not quite sure why we have unaffordability, an issue of unaffordability, when there are median houses that can be afforded by actually lower than median incomes. What's that?
Is that a question? Why don't we
That's
ask-
the question.
All right, and then we have another person who has a question. So why don't you go ahead?
If it's and I can't, I would be challenged to untangle, because you raise obviously some very complex issues.
Yes, it is.
And I would comment that I think of the work that we do is about serving that household that is in need of affordable housing, but it's also about serving the community. You've got a building, you've got somebody who's now living in downtown, they've got access to schools, that we're not just solving a housing problem, we're solving a community problem.
And that's economic inequality.
Yes, but the benefit, I think, the benefit of the work that I see over 30 years is in conservation and town forests and agriculture and housing, is to strengthen Vermont communities. So that's, I'm going to, if I might, I'm going to leave it at that and look forward to perhaps a deeper conversation with you. Around affordability, if you take somebody at median income and you look at what 30% of their income they're going to pay on housing, you're right, and perhaps 2/3 of Vermont, that works. It doesn't work necessarily in the Upper Valley or in Chittenden County. And that's why we're generally serving people who are at 60%, 50%, and 30% of the area median income, where they simply don't have access, they simply cannot afford. And then there are parts of the state, Northeast Kingdom, where it's not necessarily affordability, it's the quality of what's being offered.
Let me just say, because I work preventing foreclosures.
Yes.
Meaning I see the whole process, how people get into trouble and then get out of it. I can say that part of what's ignored is banks' responses to this problem.
Yes.
And the complications they cause.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ernie.
My name is Beth Barris. I was a homeowner and now I'm a renter. I live in the outskirts of Norwich. I have several questions. One of my concerns that I'm not seeing addressed, and I haven't seen it addressed on the Twin Pines Housing website, are the need to have pets, whether they're therapy pets or whether they're animals. I know as single people, as we age, having pets, whether they're therapy pets or not, is a very important issue that's difficult to find in our community, and certainly whether we have therapy pets or regular pets, it's very difficult to find housing that allows
Happy to answer that.
pets. And then I have a couple more
Oh, do you
questions.
wanna-
Why don't you just quickly ask?
Yep, thank you. Another one is lack of, what I see is not criticism, transparency on the Twin Pines website. You can't see what inside of a place looks like. There's very little information. Are they air conditioned? You know, what kinds of amenities are there? So it's great to see the outside, but it's really helpful to see what they look like on the inside. And then the last question I have, or comment is, or question is, it seems like we're looking at dated ways of looking at building structures that are, there's very innovative projects that are out there in other parts of the country, in Colorado and Portland and other places where they're looking to solve these issues, and they're taking these factory-built small home ideas and they're building cottage communities, or they're also called pocket communities on the outskirts of the sides of communities where they're small homes, they're for 1 or 2 or 3 people that live in them. They're factory built so that they're affordable, and they may be 20 to 100 units that are built, and there are very innovative projects that are very affordable, and I'm just not seeing that we're bringing these up as possibilities. Thank you.
Thanks, those are great questions. So first, pets. Our general policy is no pets. However, in accordance with federal law, Section 504, a reasonable accommodation, an individual who has a therapy animal, support animal, can apply and go through a process to get that animal approved. So there is a process. One. Question 2, I think you asked about website and interiors of units. That's a great suggestion. Some housing organizations do have pictures on the inside, most don't. But I think that's something I can certainly bring up with our folks, and as we're moving forward, and we're always trying to innovate, always trying to figure out better ways to convey what we've got, what we're providing in terms of services and amenities. Doing a more thorough job on the website is helpful, and trying to hit certainly some, if there's particular features in a unit or building, we want to make sure that we're highlighting that. Most of the housing, you mentioned air conditioning, most of the housing that we're producing does not have air conditioning. We've got some senior housing that has air conditioning. As we're looking at some of these newer buildings, those will have, some of those will have air conditioning. It used to be, 20 years ago, no one would build affordable housing in this part of the country with air conditioning. I got to tell you, it's changing, and it doesn't take a summer like this, or maybe it does take a summer like this to understand the value of having air conditioning. So that is something, whether it's, it's becoming more prevalent. And I don't know if you've got comments or thoughts on that particular, or the agency.
The third question, I think.
Okay. The third question.
Pocket homes.
Pocket homes. So I will let you talk about pocket homes. As a general matter, we try to be innovative. We've got the first net zero multifamily building in the state of New Hampshire going up. We're one of the first, if not the first, nonprofit agency to preserve USDA housing that was at risk of being lost. We're one of the first to use this National Housing Trust Fund dollars to bring a project to fruition that's serving chronically homeless. So happy to be innovative. We try to do it every day. There's always opportunities to do new things. I think one of the challenges with pocket neighborhoods like that is sometimes the availability of sewer. Those work a lot better when there is some sewer to which you can hook up, because otherwise there's a lot of costs associated with it. Martin, you can add to that.
Well, actually, I was going to address a side part of that, which is you mentioned manufactured housing. So it's actually an event this morning in Montpelier called Mass Timber that's promoting panelized off-site production. Housing costs, so if we're looking at anywhere from $270 to $320 $20,000 per unit. As construction costs go up, the less we can produce. And so we are definitely interested in innovation around how construction is done. It is stick-built. You know, what we're all familiar with is seeing the crew out there and starting from zero to shingling. Is that the most efficient way? We, though, rely on Twin Pines, who has done the first net zero. We rely on developers to tell us this is what we're watching the industry, and we would love to see a proposal that does some innovation in housing construction.
I think some of my questions were just addressed. I've been on the planning commission and actually wrote the last successful plan that we were able to get through without a terrible fight about it. So I am very interested in these prefab Vermont modular factory because something that's happened surreptitiously, I think, in the town is that these mother-in-law apartments that are going over garages. And maybe we could do a little research to find out, and I know a lot of the lots in town are quite large, the degree to which we can encourage the Vermont modular factory homes in the backyard. That was done at the Partridge House. And that, the only thing I can see is that there's a septic issue. And, but in any case, that would be far more acceptable to a lot of people in town. I'm actually, though, not against the development down Route 5. I think if it were done right, I'd take a look at that car store and wonder what we could do for affordable housing there. It's walking distance. We might be able to get a number of kids to help with our school population. I think we need to have a very diverse approach to what we're doing. I am a teacher of 30 years and retired, and I want to see more kids in our school. That's my main goal. Thank you. Your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone else? Do you have any final remarks, gentlemen?
When we put together the slideshow, I meant to have a slide at the beginning that, so my name is Martin Hahn. I'm at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. You can reach me at mhahn@vhcb.org. Just go to the VHCB website, vhcb.org. So I'm happy to continue a conversation, and we're here really, though, to support Andrew and the work of Twin Pines. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and to be here tonight. Again, you know, to echo Martin's point here, Andrew Winter at Twin Pines. You can email me at andrew@twinpineshousing.org. And I'm, happy I'm always happy to come out and talk about affordable housing. It's work that I've dedicated my life to professionally. And I believe strongly in the importance of creating a decent, safe home for everyone. And I look forward to continuing the conversations in the days ahead. Thank you.
So I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank you. We are on the way here. This is a process, and we understand we need to do a lot of listening. We heard some good ideas today. I would say we should decide what we want, right? And we should articulate what we want. And these guys are resources, but ultimately, we all should, step up and say what we need and what we want, and we're looking forward to your continued input. Jackie?
Can you just talk briefly about September?
All right, the next forum in September will focus on housing developed by the private sector. So generally unsubsidized housing, and we don't have a date yet, but we will announce it soon. And we'll look forward to seeing many of you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Thanks for